This is a PowerPoint about ethical and legal considerations in sport and exercise science research, and in this PowerPoint we'll be looking at why we have ethics, the definition of legal and ethical, and different scenarios surrounding a young gymnast team and how some scenarios can have different problems with their ethics to do with the coaches and the participants. Firstly, we'll be looking at why do we have ethics. Now first we have to ensure the safety and the welfare of the participants. Then we have to ensure the researchers only work within the area of expertise. We also have to consider the safety of the researcher, because if something goes wrong, not only will the participants will be affected, but the researcher will be too, because they may have to deal with legal considerations if it's that bad. And like I just said, if some ethics are not followed, it can result in legal action. Now, we also have ethics because back in World War II, the Nazis used prisoners in concentration camps and conducted many experiments on them. Some of them included being submerged in different temperatures, so some would be put in very hot pools, some would be put in very cold pools, and some would be put in a room and tested with oxygen and at different altitudes, and this is for the, I believe this is for the jets and the pilots and the jets. And of course this was against the prisoner's will, and the experiments resulted in a lot of emotional and physical harm for the prisoners, and because of this, prior to 1947 there was no legal or ethical considerations in experiments. But after that, the Nuremberg Code was introduced, and this is a code of conduct with 10 rules, and these include legal and ethical issues when it becomes involved with human experimentation. Now, the definition of legal is just simply being legal means working within the boundaries of the law, and most or everyone knows the law, and obviously if this is not followed then serious action can be taken place. And ethical means ethics are just moral principles and what's said is right or wrong. There's no physical or emotional harm involved. So it's not anything to do with the law, but it's just mainly people's beliefs, and if they view it as wrong or they don't want to do it, then it's their right to say that they don't want to do it, for example. Now first we move on to scenario 1, and the context of all of the scenarios is that we are experimenting with a young GB gymnast team, and the first scenario is the effects of punishments on faults in gymnastics when performing tricks on the beam. And the first thing wrong with this is, firstly, there's no specific specification of what punishments they may be. So they may be very little punishments, as just maybe constructive criticism, or maybe not just purely criticism, and that maybe can seem as not as bad. But other punishments may involve harm to a young gymnast, or can put them under stress and a lot of pressure, because if they feel daunted by the fact that they're about to be punished, then this will obviously affect the way they perform, and that leads to mental health and safety. And because of this, pressure can cause, especially young people, can cause them to shake and feel nervous, and obviously if they're on the beam, then it's more likely that they're going to fall off or injure themselves. That leads me on to respect. So not only does the participant have to respect the coach, but the coach has to also respect the participant, because obviously it's just a code of conduct for a participant or a gymnast or whoever to respect their coach, but the coach has to take into consideration that if they're going to punish the children or the young gymnasts, that they're probably not going to want to come back, because they probably are going to cause them not even physical but maybe emotional harm. So the coach has to take that in consideration. The next thing is the right to withdraw. Now this will come up in a lot of my scenarios, because especially the young gymnasts, if they don't want to do it, then they have the right to not take part in the experiment. So for example, someone may be feeling particularly nervous or particularly shaky because of this, and they may feel that they're not sturdy enough to perform tricks on the beam, as this is a very hard task. So if they want to withdraw from the experiment, then they are allowed to, and the coach has said, and the experimenter has to let them not participate anymore. And the last thing is the risk-benefit analysis. And this means, are the risks worth taking for the benefit of the experiment? Now, in this particular experiment, I would personally, I would say no. Because they're young gymnasts, there's obviously a lot that could go wrong with performing tricks on the beam, because it's a very hard thing to do. So, personally, I don't think it's worth taking the risk of them falling off and possibly injuring themselves very badly, just for the benefit of the results of the test. Next we move on to scenario 2, and this is a gymnast coach asks 10 students who are at a high level to take part in a high intensity Limbo class for some research. Once the results are recorded, they'll be posted on an online forum. Now, the first thing that's wrong with this is the fact that the coach has asked the students. Now, with experiments, they strictly have to be volunteers, because this could be caused to be biased, seen to be biased, or some students may feel like they have to do it and they don't want to. So with having volunteers, it means people are interested in the experiment and they want to take part, which can also lead to the benefit they might try harder for the experiments. But if they are not wanting to take part in a high intensity numbering class, they're probably not going to want to try their hardest because they're not interested in what they're doing. Secondly, again, is the right to withdraw. So the students or participants have the right to leave if they need to, if they feel like it's not the right thing for them, like I explained in the previous clip. The next thing is you have to make sure that the coach is qualified. Because it's a high intensity limbering class, they're obviously dealing with the young students, so they're going to have to make sure that they have the right qualifications, so that if something goes wrong, someone hurts themselves, they have the right, for example, they know first aid, so if someone tears a muscle, rips a muscle because it's a high intensity limbering class, and they know what to do for that person to be able to relieve their pain and get them to maybe a hospital quicker if it's that bad, or give advice on how to help. And also they have to know what they're doing. So for example, with stretching, you have to make sure you hold the stretch or ease into the stretch. You can't just make sure you can't bounce into the stretch or go into the stretch quickly, because otherwise this will lead your muscles to tear or rip or even strain. So the coach has to be qualified to make sure they know what they're doing, they're prepared for the worst, and to make sure that no one in the class is at risk. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is scientific misconduct, and especially with this scenario, because the gymnast coach has asked their particular students, they have to make sure that they do not change the results and make sure they're not biased, especially because they know that it's going to be posted on an online forum. Now, this could cause many problems, because if it's biased, it could be given wrong results, and this then is not ethical or even legal in some situations, because they're not being true, not being truthful, and the coach or person in charge can get themselves into a lot of trouble. The next thing we're going to talk about is data protection, and this is because the results are going to be recorded and they'll be posted on an online forum. Now, especially with younger participants, again, you have to be careful of their data and their confidentiality, but because it's an online forum, this means probably anyone could see this, so they might have their name on there, might have their age, they'll have their results from the intensity class, so people will be able to see that, and people that may not be allowed to see that or shouldn't really be able to see that will be able to, because it's online. So this goes against the Data Protection Act. Now, scenario 3 is testing the effectiveness of stretching in partners. The coach uses verbal instruction and a little demonstration. The coach also explains that they'll be taking part in a static stretching class, but they will end up teaching P&F. The class lasts for an hour, and the students are told that they are not allowed to leave without their parents or carers. Now, first in the scenario, they'll need to consider parental consent. Because it's a stretching class, which, well, they explain will be static, but then it goes into PNF. The parents need to know what their child will be taking part in, because they're testing the effectiveness. So they'll obviously be experimenting with things and trying things and recording things. So it's always safe and it's always good to have parental consent from the parents of the children, because the children themselves may not know what they may be getting themselves, well, they know what they're getting themselves into, but they may not understand the full picture of what they're going to be doing. So if the parent knows and they feel confident, then their children will probably enter a situation they're not happier. Now next we have the qualified coach again, because it's a specialised class for that particular sport. The coach has to be qualified, so they have to know what they're doing, just like I said in the previous test, previous scenario, sorry. But because in this scenario that the coaches are using verbal instruction and little demonstration, and they've also gone against what they said, they've changed the class, this does suggest that it's not a qualified coach, because a qualified coach will be told not to do this. They'd have a lesson plan, they'd let the parents know what they're doing, so this does suggest that they don't know what they're doing and they're not qualified. Next leads me into health and safety. Especially with PNF stretching, it takes a lot of knowledge, or specialised knowledge, to know how to do it properly. So with this, the children have to be reminded of how to do it, and because they're doing it with little demonstration, this may lead them to hurt themselves. And that just proves that they haven't been taught correctly. The last one I'm going to talk about is deception, which means that the children especially have been told that they're going to do a static stretching class, but obviously they move to PNF, and these are completely different. So this goes against the right that the children don't know what they're doing, their parents don't know what they're doing, and the class changes completely, and that is not a very good thing. The last scenario is scenario 4, and the coach wants to experiment with age, ability and age. All students have to perform a certain amount of tricks to determine the category they will be in. Once they've recorded the results, they put them on shows and elastic slabs so they can compare results. And I've already spoken about data protection, health and safety, and right to withdraw, so I'm only going to talk about ethical clearance and research responsibility. Now, because the students are experimenting with ability and age, ethical clearance has to be taken place just to make sure that the experiment can be done, because there may be problems with the fact that age and ability may not relate or correlate. So some older students might find things easy, where some of them, they may not be at the same stage of ability. So if the ethical clearance takes place, then the experimenter knows that they have the right to conduct the experiment. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is research responsibility. And research responsibility is just basically working safely and sensibly, and there's also links in respect, so you don't disrespect your clients, and just making sure that the results you get and the research you use are accurate within respecting the lines of your participants. Thanks for listening!